Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay for Week 3. We've got a lot of action to break down, and we're here to give it all. We finally have our full crew: Nick Jablonski, Jack McGovern, Raghu Achukola. Thanks all of you for being here. We've got an exciting show, so let's get right into it. And we'll start with one burning question. And my burning question this week is: we did have 3 more 3-0 sweeps this week, which makes 8 in our first 9 series. Is Parity taking a step back this season, or have we just gotten a little bit unlucky so far? I'll throw it to you first, Nick.
Yeah, I think we've gotten a little bit unlucky so far. I mean, we saw the Washington-New York 2-1 series. Charlotte was 2 games came down to Charlotte had the lead and lost the lead. This Rochester-Toronto series, we had some injuries that definitely prevented us from seeing the best of Rochester in the last 2 games. But that first game was very back and forth. And we've had that across this whole time. I mean, New Orleans was tied with San Antonio heading into snitch on pitch. I genuinely think it's just a little bit unlucky. Best of Toronto.
How about you, Jack?
Yeah, I'll add that the League City New Orleans games were close before the snitch came onto the pitch, and New Orleans was just highly efficient in the snitch game. Opened some leads in some of the games, but there were portions in all 3 games that were tight early on, and yeah, there was a lot of bad injury luck for Toronto in particular that could have made that series much closer.
Rags, agree, disagree?
I mean, I mostly agree. I think it's also the case that we're seeing a lot of, and maybe it's too early to decide whether it's a trend or not, of the team, just like one team always running away with it during snitch on pitch through all three games, right? And I think the big exception to that was the New York Washington series, where like New York only really ran away with it in one of the games. But generally speaking, we've had this trend of like, yeah, San Antonio and New Orleans were close game 1, and New Orleans League City were close all 3 games, and then just the same outcome happened each time during snitch on pitch, which I'm not sure if it has much to deal with like general parity, but it is a trend that could just mean that like teams just don't have the same depth to be able to go sort of all throughout snitch on pitch, and so like you'll see the better teams sort of run away with it. But I definitely think it's too early to tell.
Yeah, I think it's something we talked about a little bit last week as well, where it's, in snitch on pitch, you can really rely on your stars, your best players, because it's at smaller portions of game, it's smaller moments. And, in a lot of these situations, the team with the better star players is playing away in snitch on pitch. Part of the Toronto Rochester series, obviously the injuries Jack was talking about, some of those special players on the Toronto roster weren't able to go in a couple of the last games. I think it's kind of all playing a part. I do think it's interesting, though. We see New Orleans like absolutely shut down League City's offense this week. I mean, League City was dropping 80 or 90 points a game on Austin. So as we look ahead to this huge San Antonio-Austin series that's coming up this weekend, definitely looks like, we might start seeing signs of parity, especially in both big series that are coming up this weekend: Boston, Washington, and Austin, San Antonio. But before we talk about anything in the future, let's start talking about our series from this week. New Orleans sweeps its second ever series, gets its second ever series win, and its first at home against the League City Legends. As was mentioned, close games, almost all to the 20-minute mark, but New Orleans goes 3-0 in snitch grabs, really dominates the snitch on pitch period. Jack, what did you see as kind of some of the difference makers for this New Orleans team that really allowed them to flip the script that they've struggled with in the past?
Yeah, I think coming into the season, I thought New Orleans would live and die by its beaters. And it was a good performance by the Curse beaters. But what really stood out to me was the depth in the chaser game from New Orleans and the array of weapons that they have off the ball. So a player like Dylan DeLee, who comes from the LSU program, first season in MLQ, hadn't really played competitively a whole lot, even though had been around the sport for a couple of years. I thought was fantastic in this series, receiving the ball, just being really aggressive, getting to the hoops, finding fast break opportunities. Also someone like Marcellus Lewis. And a lot of that, I think, comes back to the distribution that players like PJ Mitchell and Emily Thompson are dishing out for New Orleans. This is a really good passing team. And I just really love watching them play. I'm excited for what they can do the rest of the season. I think this is going to be a dangerous team.
Rags, I was just talking a few minutes ago about, the point totals, what League City was able to do against Austin versus what they were able to do this weekend. How do you think New Orleans so effectively stymied League City offensively?
Yeah, and I know that I think the chaser offense is really what carried them on the offense, as Jack mentioned. But on the defense, I think it was League City's inability to break down the look that New Orleans played a lot, where when they'd have control, they'd play Josh Mansfield sort of back, even behind the hoops a lot of the times. And then what that would sort of force these League City beaters to do is try to be a little over aggressive. And there was a lot of drives where I think you can tell that the chasers sort of like forgot about that beater hiding behind the hoop, or were making assumptions that Josh wouldn't make that beat in time, and he was always there. And so I think that was a really interesting thing, that not only did that create a lot of situations where the defense was able to make a stop, but because of the position where like a chaser would be going all out on, he doesn't even have any beaters left on defense, and it'd be like Ashton or Hayden going in trying to drive towards the hoops, and then they get beat right before it, and that create the fast break the other way as well. And so I think that was a huge part of how New Orleans was able to stop this League City attack.
Nick, obviously the New Orleans offensive attack got stymied here and there as well. It wasn't exactly a high-scoring series, especially in the 20-minute initial period. The difference in the only exception to that really was Charlton Trammell. What did you see from him this weekend?
I saw a decisive Charlton Trammell. I saw Charlton Trammell off the ball, which is so exciting to see. I mean, we've talked about it on this program for the last 3 weeks. Is we need to see these threats to score playing off the ball more, getting those decisive mismatches and then taking advantage of them. And New Orleans, whom we complimented last week about having an offensive plan, had an offensive plan this weekend, and it was to get those mismatches off the ball and utilize them. And Charlton Trammell was the peak example of that, probably this weekend, probably throughout the season, honestly.
Jack, you kind of mentioned you expected it to be a very, beater-centric win if New Orleans was going to win, and it ended up being a lot about the qualifier players. What questions or concerns do you have about the beater core from this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rags is right in saying that New Orleans sitting back forced League City to play a little bit more aggressive. I would still like to see New Orleans do more to generate counterattacking opportunities like you'd see from a San Antonio Soldado squad. So once you draw the League City beaters deep and maybe force them to make a mistake or throw blood on opportunities out chasers and create some opportunities for easy goals for your very athletic chaser core going the other way. So, I think if New Orleans is going to make the next step, that's what I'd really want to see from them.
Yeah, and I agree. I feel like there were a few plays I saw where really the beaters almost didn't keep up with the quaffle play, not even on a fast break opportunity, just in kind of the New Orleans beaters weren't really bothering to get into the offensive half in a half court set. And I'll be honest, it was 99 degrees and humid in New Orleans. I'm sure those beaters, which is, it's not the deepest court, it's a very talented court, it's not a super deep court. To some degree, we're conserving energy in what was a very, very long series. But I agree with you. I'd like to see a little bit more. And I think that's kind of a theme of this MLQ season so far across the entire league. Would love to see a little bit more beater and quaffle coherence. Nick, what do you feel about all that?
I mean, when you've got 4, maybe 5 beaters, right? Griffin Parr has pushed into the beater game for this team lately. You do what you can, and this team, I do want to give credit to the coaching staff. This team continued to play its depth in the quaffle game, continued to cycle through its beaters effectively. And when you talk about it being a 99-degree day, we have seen in the past this New Orleans team sort of play its stars for far too long, and this was not the case. They were well aware of how comfortable they were in the seeker game and what they were going to do there. And I think that they definitely changed up their strategy from previous years, and it paid big dividends this weekend.
Yeah. But kind of getting back into the quaffle game, there was an added level of dynamics. I think we also saw to some degree in the San Antonio series. They just were a little bit more outmatched personnel wise in that series. Rags, what do you think is different about this Curse team?
Yeah, and I think for the last, I don't know how many years, it's sort of been the same story with the Curse program where like I would see a game and I'd be like, they're beaters or creating these wild zero scenarios where like they'd be without bludgers for like 6 or 7 minutes. They'd have a couple people drive in, sort of be spun around in place, nothing come out of it, right? And so it would be complete beater domination at times, and then just the chasers needing somehow even more to score. And I think that was the big thing holding New Orleans back so many times, where you'd have Josh or Sarah or any of their beaters create like 9 seconds of no bludgers, and the chasers still couldn't find a way to score. It was like it was the complete opposite. It was actually like super incredible to see, where like you would have a New Orleans beater forcing 0 bludgers, and then like within 3 seconds the passing would occur to where there was already a score. There was a play, I think in maybe New Orleans' first goal, where Josh hit the attack, and as soon as he was throwing the bludger, there was already a pass going in like deep into Legend territory, and then like within 3 seconds later it was a goal. And like the turnaround from, I would say, the team in which their chasers needed the most seconds of 0 bludger to score versus like this team where like they're able to score in like such short amounts of time. I do think League City could have done a lot to stop this. I think League City in a sense made it a little easy for them, but I don't want to take away from New Orleans, because this is definitely not the same New Orleans chasing squad at all.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the development they've done on players that have been with the program for so long. Names we've talked about, Emily Thompson and Charlton Trammell. I mean, these are people who have come along with this program for so long, and we've seen so much of that this season that veteran players or even younger players who've developed in these systems can have such an impact at this point, as so much of the sport is starting to turn over in a big way. Before we jump to our interview, I'll put one on you guys. What each of you thinks this New Orleans team ceiling is this season? I'll start with you, Nick.
Going in my previous semifinals ? No, that's a joke for all of us. I would say realistically, this is a quarterfinals potential team, right? If they get the right bracket draw, if they push through to get to that. We've seen how hard it is to come out from that day one bracket and make the semifinals the next day. So I think that this is a Curse team that, if given the opportunity, will fight their way through the quarterfinals, and then maybe not necessarily have the stamina, but playing 7 games of Quidditch in the first day kind of leads to that. It's more of a statement on the format pushing that way and giving that advantage, rather than this team's strengths. Like, this team, I think, could on any given day catch any team off guard.
Jack, where would you put it?
Yeah, I would agree. Quarterfinals, but I just want to underscore how tough making the quarterfinals is in MLQ. That would require, knocking off a Kansas City team that's going to be drawn from the Creighton squad and some other really good college programs, and beating one of either the 4th place team in the East, maybe, or the 3rd place team in the North. So you're looking at maybe Charlotte or one of Rochester, Indianapolis, or Minneapolis. Those are good teams who have been making the quarterfinals consistently in MLQ. So this would be a huge breakthrough for New Orleans, and I think they can do it.
Yeah, it's a really good point you make, because I think the combination of the Canadians not playing last year, Kansas City ending up not being able to go championship, kind of made that lower bracket, that Saturday lower bracket, a little less competitive than I think it's going to be this year. I think it's going to be a bloodbath this year. Rags, where are you on ceiling?
Yeah, I'll say quarterfinals. I think I was tempted, like Nick, to be like sort of caught up in the hype and go for the semifinals. But as you mentioned, that would be a very tall order, where they would probably have to beat a sort of number 1 or number 2 seed team in each division. And I don't know if, since what we've seen from them from San Antonio, where they were able to sort of hang a little bit, but not in the long run, I don't think they'd be able to carry that over against like maybe New York or Boston or Washington. But this, like I said, this is not the same Curse team. And I think the one thing that has always held them back in the past was just the fact that their chasers seem to need these extended periods of no bludgers to score. And I cannot even begin to like imagine just like how high the ceiling is once these since these chasers have figured out to score on like 3 seconds of zeros. And like that beating core, and it's not just like Josh Mansfield, right? Like Alex Pucciarelli, Sarah Nailing, like so many talented beaters in that beating core. And I definitely think they can hang with some of the tougher beating cores out there. And so like if their chasers only need 3-4 seconds, I mean, yeah, quarterfinals isn't even I think a tall ask of them. I think that's where the ceiling is.
You also left out Tufts veteran Mike Sanders, of course. But yeah, would be their first quarterfinal berth since 2016. So that ceiling would be an accomplishment. And it's cool to see, you know, Rochester is now basically on the verge of clinching a return to MLQ championships. Curse is now definitely in the driver's seat to get back to the MLQ championships as well. So seeing that turnover. Nick, you want to make one last point before we head over to Charlton?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. I think this New Orleans Kansas City matchup is going to be incredible. We saw that kind of Creighton, Kansas, all of the schools that this team pulls from, sort of struggled in the beating game at USQ Cup, and Creighton has the athleticism to overwhelm that, and that athleticism has definitely carried its way into this Kansas City squad. But I'm curious to see if like this Curse team, which we've talked about their beaters not necessarily dominating all the way through, but can definitely turn it up against that. And I think that's going to be a really exciting thing to see, is like the sheer athleticism of Kansas City against this disciplined, organized Curse team.
It's also so interesting because, of course, we haven't yet to see this Kansas City team yet. We've already seen 6 games out of this Curse team. So easy to draw assumptions when you see a lot of a team early and don't see another one. So let's move on to our first interview of the evening. Assistant coach of the New Orleans Curse, Charlton Trammell. Charlton, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
Hey, happy to be here. Thank y'all for gassing us up a little bit. Great to hear.
So obviously, I think a theme, especially from Rags, was really about how this feels like a different Curse team. And when we were doing our previews, I feel like a lot of the previews were like, oh, it's a lot of the same names we've seen before from this Curse team. Obviously, New Orleans not the biggest Quidditch area. Has this team felt different to you guys all season, or do you feel like things have just kind of been clicking in the last couple of weeks leading into this series?
I would definitely say leading up all the way till the Thursday night before the series, and when I woke up Saturday morning, it felt different. I woke up and it wasn't, I think we could take League City this year. I woke up, I told everybody, this is the year. We're taking them. If we don't, we messed up.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like one thing we've kind of been highlighting a lot about you guys is a lot of teams haven't hit their strategic peaks yet this season. We've seen a lot of strategic failures, and this Curse team seemed to be making a lot of smart strategic decisions. So who's kind of behind a lot of that, and kind of what are you guys looking at as you kind of try to figure out the season?
I would say like a lot of our offensive development, it started in baby steps last year, but we hadn't quite figured it out. But this year, I think Coach Brian made the offense more digestible to everybody, and it made it a lot easier for everybody to flow and understand where to move, and just relentlessly drilling positioning. And as far as defense goes, I'm pretty sure that's a Josh Mansfield thing. And hey, y'all saw the results. I'm loving it.
So talk a little about yourself personally. I mean, you were all over the score sheet. So, kind of coming down the field, did it just feel like lanes were wide open, or do you feel like you were really kind of working against this League City defense?
Well, Thursday night we all had a talk, and I said, and they asked, "What are you afraid of this series?" And I said, "Me being too passive." I feel like I've been that for too long, and that might just be because of the pandemic, and I haven't played much through the years. But I want it to be aggressive, and it helps a lot when you have other people to shoulder the load. When you have PJ Mitchell next to me with 9 assists, when you got Marcellus Lewis with 5, Dylan DeLee with 4 goals as well, it makes it a lot easier to be aggressive and just take what you want.
So obviously, like I was saying, there's a lot of, this is the same Curse team, and there are names that have been around forever. But who are some of the more up-and-coming players that you feel are really starting to make a difference this season for this team?
It's been great having Dylan with us. He just super athletic, but still has a little bit of raw talent that give us an extra month and a half before Kansas City can even be more of a dynamic player. I think we're still scratching the surface with Marcellus. He missed San Antonio due to a non-COVID illness. Was still kind of getting over it this time, so still on reduced minutes. So we have a lot to see there. Veronica Spicer is doing some great things on defense. I think Emily Thompson had 5 stops on defense. So we got a lot of pieces making it work.
Yeah. Hey, Charlton. It's been a while since you've played off the ball. Can you talk to what that changes up for you on the offensive side? A lot of the time you were catching the ball in space and then working on 1 or 2 options before scoring, rather than in the past you've had to take it through 4, sometimes 5 people, depending on where things were going.
Yeah, I'll say it's a little bit easier. I didn't expect to have my most goals ever scored in a series at 30 years old, but like I said, when you got PJ dishing it to me, it makes it a lot easier.
Thanks for making us all of us over 30 look good, Charlton. We appreciate it.
Here for you.
So obviously you guys take that tough sweep to a good Soldados team last week, and you have to turn right around. How'd you guys kind of manage to keep the morale up and say, hey, sure, we went down 0-3, but this series is arguably way, way more important. We got to keep our heads up. This is a team we can beat.
Oh, yeah. Soldados, it didn't bring us down a bit. We knew what to do going into that series. It was never to win. If we snuck one out, hey, that's great. Our whole thing is make it a championships. Soldados was about getting better. Didn't matter what the results were. We got better that week. We had film that we could build off that week, and we had one big practice that we could pull it all together, and that's all we needed.
Yeah, I mean, you are one of the few teams. I believe there's only 2 in the entire league that have a non-playing coach. Can you talk to the advantages that brings? Because it seems like y'all have some of the best strategic input of a team in a game-to-game basis going into the series.
I mean, if you want me to go on for like 30 minutes about Brian, I can, but I'll try to keep it short. Having Brian as a non-playing coach has been just completely instrumental in what we're doing. It's so hard to make adjustments as a playing coach, and just setting the pace for everything that we do, setting up our practices. But going into game 2 of League City, I looked at Brian. I said, we won game 1. Game 2 is on you. They're going to make adjustments. If we win this game or we lose this game, this one's on you. And what did he do? We started off pretty slow in game 2 against League City. Brian came up to us, told us something we need to do. We implemented it. We flipped the script completely. And so game 2 was all Brian.
Charlton, you mentioned, the goals getting to championships, and you haven't gotten there yet. But obviously the percentages are high now based on the 3-0 sweep result. It would take a very specific set of circumstances. How does that kind of change the outlook? Because I mean, you got this huge super series, end of the regular season, Austin and Kansas City. We were just talking, about how kind of hype this Kansas City matchup is. So kind of how do expectations and how do you kind of push forward now that you, to a certain degree, have kind of accomplished step 1?
Well, you don't want to get too ahead of yourself and just say, oh, yeah, we got Kansas City now. We haven't seen them play. We don't know who they are. But I do feel confident in who we are as a team. And who we are as a team is somebody that can take that Kansas City series, make it as the 3rd seed in the South Division. And so I think that's where all of our expectations change. And it was all about getting better just so that we could make it. But now we see what we can do. And we have a month and a half to prepare for that super series. And I think that can make all the difference in solidifying us as the 3rd seed.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Charlton. Best of luck in that super series. And it looks like a good chance we'll be seeing you guys at championships as well. So see you later in the summer.
Thank y'all for having me. Y'all have a good one.
Awesome. All right. Moving on to our next series, which is over in the East Division, New York taking on Ottawa at the end of the evening. It was definitely a one-sided affair, New York, with quite dominant play throughout all 3 games. I think something that might be kind of lost to a certain degree is that, there's a big difference between Toronto and Ottawa and kind of the experiences they've had coming out of the pandemic. Because when we were doing an interview with Michael Howard, the Toronto head coach, after the Cleveland series, he was talking about, hey, we went to CCI. A bunch of us went to CCI. A bunch of people on the Toronto team have played for Rochester in the past, have been on their MLQ rosters. Whereas this Ottawa team is very young and a lot of their players are very new, and it's a very different experience coming back from the pandemic. Jack, what did you kind of see as some of the kind of high points coming out of this Ottawa team, or things that looked like things they can build on going forward this season?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to chaser Haley Yap. I thought she showed really great composure on the ball, distribution, finding open chasers. I was impressed by what she could do under heavy pressure from a physical New York chaser defense and a highly mobile New York beating core. So she had a couple goals, I think. Or was involved in a couple goals. So yeah, definitely a shout out to her.
Awesome. Nick, New York obviously able to go into its depth a little bit more. And, from week one, we saw how strong their depth was as they went down to 21 and still took that series off of Washington. Unsurprising that they could perform in this way all the way through the roster. But who impressed you kind of from this New York team?
Annika Kim. I mean, we've been hiring her this whole season. The few minutes she got in the Washington series, she was super composed. And this was a series where she had the opportunity to sort of prove her mettle, and she did in flying colors all the way through.
Jack, I'll throw it to you. I've got an interesting question here about this New York Titans team because we know the seeking on this team is quite strong, but Vinny Iannucci comes down with 2 grabs this week. Kellen Cupid comes down with the 1. Both of Kellen Cupid's catches this season have now been in contested situations. Should Vinny be starting at seeker for this New York team at this point?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. I've always been a huge fan of what Vinny brings on the pitch, both as a chaser and a seeker. I think he has so much energy and is just an aggressive player with a nose for the goal or the snitch sock or whatever is in front of him, whatever the goal may be. I'd be excited to see Vinny get some more opportunities, especially depending on the matchup. I wouldn't necessarily pick a single starting seeker, but for some bigger snitches, like the snitch this past weekend against Ottawa, I think Matthew Cooper snitched the series against Washington, and Kellen did have it was a contested catch, but I thought it was a good catch there on Cooper. So I think New York is just going to have to feel this out and going to have to look at the specific matchup with the snitch.
Nick, what side are you on, Vinny or Kellen?
I mean, you gotta consider Kellen as the starting seeker right now for this team. I mean, the celebrations off the chain. We know how I am about snitch celebrations, period. That's a huge morale booster. But also, right, this is a team that I think as it goes later in the season is going to play those matchups more and more. And I think you have to figure out which seeker is good against which. We in 2019 Boston were very much a matchup-dependent team. Sometimes we started Harry Greenhouse, sometimes we started Greg Bento, and then Tyler Beckman came in and finished a lot of those catches, which led to this kind of same conversation going around, right? Maybe this team is built around Kellen Cupid's aggressive drive to continue pursuing the snitch. The number of times Kellen gets thrown down by a snitch right away and just pops back up and continues to pursue the snitch tires that snitch out a lot. And so we do see these Vinny Iannucci second shift catches. We see that a lot in the MLQ game, though, across the whole, that second seeker catches it. So I think if you're going to start one, Vinny, well, maybe more of a technician right now than Kellen. Kellen's aggressive drive is going to keep tiring out these snitches and forcing those sort of looks.
Yeah, and I do think I oversimplify in the fact that, contested catches is a skill. You have to get the hands in the right places at the right times in those situations. It's not a random coin flip as we sometimes simplify it to being. And, I think we all kind of want to say it is really easy to say that, you play the matchup, but there's such a huge piece of pride when it comes to being a seeker. And it is, you have to feel yourself. And, when you have a seeker like Kellen, the dancing, as much as it's for everyone else's entertainment value, it's also Kellen feeling himself as a seeker. And, if you start mixing up your orders, you start to wonder, that can start to mess with people. And it's such a hard thing to balance. And we've seen it be an issue for so many teams. And I'm interested to see how that goes forward, because hey, this New York coaching staff, has got a lot to be proud of so far. They've taken care of business in 2 series, and they've got a long way to go. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the weeks to come. Nick, I obviously don't think probably this series changes much of your opinion about this New York team, but where now that we have seen, every team from the East Division play, and now we're going to get into some really huge matchups coming up in the next few weeks: Washington, Boston, and then Charlotte, New York, and of course Boston, New York at the end of July. Where do you see this New York team slotting in this division?
That's tough. We still haven't, as silly as it sounds, we still haven't seen a team optimally attack a mark defense in this East Division. And until we see that, that's going to be tough to say. I think Boston is going to attack this New York mark defense pretty aggressively and do the right things against it, seeing what they do. But I kind of have to say second right now. This weekend's going to tell us a lot, right? If Washington fixes their issues against mark defense and sort of takes it to Boston this weekend, then that might shift a little bit. But if they don't, then we're going to see, this New York team already got the 2-1 on Washington. Playing them early in the year definitely helps.
Yeah. Obviously a huge important win that's going to carry over through the East Division. Jack, I'm not going to do the full game for all of you this time, but where do you have New York ceiling at this point? Obviously the defending runners up in MLQ.
Yeah, I think this is a team that can make it back to the finals again. I think I picked Boston to win the East Division last year. I'm sticking with that just because of some of the gaps in experience. Although I really like this New York team, and I think they have a lot of momentum going forward, and belief in themselves. Even as a relatively young group, they have some veteran leadership around John Jackson and Lindsay Morella too, and some other big contributors. So this is definitely a team that could be competing for the Benepi Cup again come August.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's jump into our second interview of the night. And we'll bring in New York Titans beater Tessa Mullins. Tessa, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I just want to start, for you personally, obviously joining in with a new program this summer, having played with, a lot of Boston teams throughout the years. How's that kind of transition been for you, and how's it been kind of finding a new footing in a new program?
It's had its ups and downs. Learning new beater pairs is obviously tough, and I remember coming straight out of USQ Cup thinking oh, we have to play MLQ right away, being oh man, we don't even get a week off. And then Washington snuck up on us, and I was oh man, I feel I haven't played with these people at all yet. And so learning the dynamic and what pairs make sense. And I think for a female beater, I have a rather untraditional style. And so I understand that as somebody's partner, that they might not be used to where I step and what balls or what exchanges I'm willing to take. And so them learning me and me learning them is gonna be difficult. But I think we found some footing, and I think everyone watched in that first Washington game us work out who I'm working with. I literally had never played with Kellen before that game, and then got off field and I was that felt not bad. So that was good. And I think going out of that game being okay, there's a little more regularity in the pairs, and we can kind of refine the details. So it's been good since then. And then Pate will start playing and it'll throw a whole nother loop. But
yeah, we're all looking forward to that for sure. When it comes to, all that, figuring it out, developing, putting people together, obviously Rachel Silver is the beater coach, does a lot of the beater coaching for the team, as well as being one of the star beaters, currently, nursing an injury. But how's it been working with her for a month and a half or so with this team?
Oh, it's been really good. And she's so interested in feedback and wanting to make sure that the new players or the people who are new to the New York squad are feel heard. And I remember literally after our first practice, she came up to me and Vinny and was like, "So what pairs did you like?" And I was like, "I have not thought about it yet, but thank you." So really dynamic. And I'll say this, her voice carries really well on the field. And so that's been pleasant. I mean, I love Lulu, but playing for Lulu and you're like, "What'd you say?" And so having that on the field's been helpful. And it's something I've really loved about coming to a new team is getting to almost revamp my understanding of beater strategy. I think you play one way for so long and you're like, okay, this is the positioning I'm comfortable with, and you get kind of stuck in that rut of what you think works best. And so getting to listen to her and when she watches my play and gives me feedback that I probably haven't heard before, and I'm like, oh, I haven't thought about it that way. And so the fresh take has been it's got me thinking about Quidditch during my regular life a lot more often, because I'm like, oh, there's more to this than I thought.
Yeah. Hey, Tessa. With that, Rachel goes down immediately after game 1 of the Washington series, and everything is forced to shift. And you talk about this, I only have a few days of playing with people, and then that changes. And then Carrie Donnelly goes down middle of game 2, and sort of comes back, sort of doesn't. But that leads to you playing major minutes throughout games 2 and 3. Can you sort of speak to that adjustment coming from a Boston program where there seems to be depth all over the place in that beater position, and you only have to play a few minutes a game and really can sort of change that?
Yeah. I had a moment before our third game where Frank had said, where I was like, "Frank, are we going to have to go to double mail? I don't know how we're going to do that, but are we going to have to?" And Frank was like, "I don't want to." And I was like, "Okay, then if I stop running, everyone else has to stop running too." That was the adjustment I made. I was like, if I can't run anymore and I have to walk a shift and just take it slow, do a really slow offense and breathe for a second, we all have to be on the same page. That and same with Carrie. If Carrie and I are gassed and we don't want to go double mail, which I agree, I'm all about not going double mail, but it's if we don't want to go double mail, then if Carrie and I are gassed, we might just have to play it slow, which I think, as we all know, is not particularly what Frank wants from this team. And so that was the mental adjustment was you can take it slow if you have to take it slow. I'm one of the people, I get on the field, the adrenaline rush, I just start running, and then my leg gave out, which I knew was coming. I think when I fell with the cramp, I yelled on the field. I was like, "It's happening," because I think I predicted this, that it was coming for me. And so it was definitely tough. And I think it was the benefit of having a partner that was used to playing top, as the traditional male beater is, became convenient in that moment where I was like, well, I can't run a lot, so let me pivot and just use my arm, and trust my throw and trust my range, because I can't run as much. And so I think that was the the adaptation for strategy. Got there eventually. But yeah, it was tough. It was extra tough because Rachel hurt herself running out to cheer for me. So I'm sorry, Rachel. But yeah, I mean, we got through, and I think the third game of that series shows how tired Carrie and I were, and definitely different from going from a beater core of 6 female beaters to 2. But yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Tessa, thanks for joining us. My question is, I know you were on the Boston practice squad last summer. I played a bit for the New York practice squad. This year, there's been a huge youth movement with the New York team. What's it been like to be on a full MLQ team that has empowered young players so much up and down the roster?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun and it's lively. I think if you had asked me, like, when I started considering, like, oh, maybe we'll play for New York this summer, because for those who don't know, I live just smack dab in the middle of the two cities. So it's fun for options, but also a little stressful. I remember literally thinking, like, oh, but the Warriors seem mean. What if the New York squad's mean? They're not. They're all nice people, but like that intensity, and the intensity is still there during games, and the energy's still up. But there's definitely that like young spirit, and that like excited to play and excited to learn. It is a weird flip being like one of the older people, and I'm 22, and that's been interesting. But it's fun and it's lively, and I think it's got that like fresh take that I was like talking about before, about like you get stuck in your ways, and then hearing people who have all these new ideas. It's been really fun, and it's also cool because I won't lie, I didn't pay a lot of attention to the college scene, especially the college scene outside of MQC this last year. And so all these names that I've never really heard of, and then you see my practice like absolutely popping off, and I'm like, oh my goodness, you're going places.
Yeah, Tessa, you talk about that Warriors core, and that's made up so much of the Titans in years past. Can you talk about the fact that this New York team, which has been so slow and so methodical for so many years, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, this is just a team that has been very reluctant to run and play in transition and play these high-speed games. Sort of how they've transitioned into this fast-paced, all over the place kind of high-speed game that we see from the Titans this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's Frank Vincent for you. And I think that was, I had a conversation with him when I was considering playing for New York, and he was like, we're all about development and we're all about running it fast. And I was like, okay, sign me up. And I think the flip has been that really like high man mark defense, and always looking to press, and like the logic of like, the quicker you turn the ball over, the quicker you get another goal, the quicker you run the score up. And that mindset definitely requires conditioning.
Yeah, shades of that old NYU program that Frank was so dominant in, for sure.
All right, Tessa, so you guys have put your home games for the season behind you now. You have to travel to Charlotte. You have to travel to Boston to finish out the season. What would you say kind of team goals are, and kind of what are you looking forward to going into the back half of your season?
Yeah, I think the like togetherness and like the understanding the team like offensive and defensive plans. I think like the benefit of like we're always looking to run is that like it's like simple, right? There's like, here's the one goal is like get the ball back and run it up the field. It's not as complex, and there's more to that. And I think working out and like hammering down those details is like the coaching staff's goal, especially as we like work closer and closer to those Boston games, and knowing that like the having everyone's like mark super on point, and everyone's not mark in the sense of like mark defense, but everyone knowing where they have to be at all times, and making sure that's like really hammered out, because the letting ourselves get like lazy with it isn't going to be productive. And I think we've now had 2 series where we weren't matched out in the beater game. And so the Quaffle game was like where our focus was, and where like this is the priority. And I think moving into Charlotte, and especially moving into Boston, like we don't have the luxury of like, oh, we're just going to outplay their beaters. And so like hammering down the pairs and the sets and what works is going to be really important, but also making sure that the chaser offense and defense like runs seamlessly, like with or without us, is really important. Knowing that like, especially going into those Boston games, like beater play is going to be all over the place, and you can't rely on anything. And so making sure like all the puzzle pieces are really lined up for those games. But obviously, we're looking for 2 clean sweeps and moving on our way.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Tessa. We'll see you in a couple weeks down in Charlotte, and best of luck the rest of the season.
Thanks.
Awesome. So let's move on to our series of the week in the North Division between Rochester and Toronto, a huge series with major implications. Toronto had the chance to be the first team to clinch a spot at MLQ Championships by clinching the East half of the North Division, but it was not to be. Rochester coming out with a sweep, a close game 1, and then 2 dominant performances from Rochester down the stretch. We were just talking to Tessa and about the mark high press that New York is running. Rochester came out with a 2-2 hybrid zone high press this weekend that paid huge dividends. Nick, what did you see from that defensive look that Rochester's breaking out?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of shades of Maryland this year, right? If you look back at USQ Maryland, you see kind of that chaser high press and continue to do that and spread out their beaters and have them engage. And it just seemed like a confident team, a team that knew what they had to do and a team that knew what they wanted to do. And Toronto didn't look like they had an answer for it all weekend. Their goals came in transition. There was one answer for it, and it was Howie on ball. But other than that, it was a really stressful thing for Toronto to handle.
Yeah, and really it was so you could tell the press was so well drilled. Just to kind of give an example that kind of stands out to me is the way that Kit Palpour would defend up top if a player went by him outside on the edge. Instead of blocking them from driving the lane, because he knew he has 2 at the hoops plus beaters, he would end up coming around the top to block a pass back up to top. And they were getting a ton of turnovers, especially in games 2 and games 3, when the ball carrying got a little less confident from Toronto with some unfortunate big injuries. The turnovers were coming left and right. And that's the kind of thing that has to be drilled in. Like, nobody's doing that just as a base thing. Jack, I know you were kind of really impressed by kind of the way that Rochester was drilled together. What impressed you about this team?
Yeah, and the beaters were flying out too on defense. This team is so well coached on both ends of the pitch. On the offensive end, when the beaters are pinstering the opposing beaters, going for a wrap or an exchange, the chasers are paying such close attention to that. Every single chaser, on ball, off ball, they're moving at the right times. They're cutting into the right places. If one chaser is driving, another is making kind of a complementary drive so that if the on ball chaser gets wrapped, they have someone to pass to in support. So we have Osa Girosa coming up as an interview. I'm really excited to talk to her. She, along with Sally Gominiak, they have done just an outstanding job coaching this team.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really, really good shout out. Nick, of course, really solid in defensive end, very solid in transition, but there were some lumps in the half court offense, as we've seen, I feel like, from just about everybody. What did you think, kind of slowed down Rochester occasionally in the half court?
Not finding Kit Palpour in dangerous spots. I mean, we saw by game 3 that Kit Palpour, who this is his second year chasing, or sort of year and a half into chasing, really, at this point, be dominant around the hoops, catching and finding those open spots. And Toronto played a majority of a 2-2 this weekend. And again, it's about ball movement. It's about moving the ball into the dangerous spots that make the zone collapse. And once Rochester started finding that, that's when opportunities happened. But far too often we saw a drive into the middle of a 2-2 and then a very floated pass. And it was windy this weekend, so the number of times a floated pass ended up completely off course. Whether that's the Quaffle player's option or the wind, I don't really know. But it was definitely that there needed to be those adjustments made immediately, and they weren't necessarily made until game 3.
Yeah, and I do think a lot of it in the half court kind of did come down to bloodsher control as well. It felt like Rochester was more stymied when bloodsher control wasn't on their side and were able to make more happen with it, especially in the late games. I felt that Toronto was even kind of mixing up their normal free and engaged beaters, and that was really confounding Rochester at times as well. Of course, like you said, finding Kip Alport ended up being a solution a lot of time. But again, that goes back to the coaching staff because, as you mentioned, he hasn't been doing it for a long time, and these players have clearly been coached up very well. A name we haven't talked about, Jack, you looked like you wanted to jump in. So
yeah, Ethan, I'll just jump in and quickly disagree. I thought Rochester was really good going against bludger control too. And I think that's something, honestly, Toronto has to work on, being a little bit more effective with two bludgers. I think it was too easy for Rochester's beaters to take advantage of them, and the Raiders beaters just got too wrapped up in the beater game sometimes and lost track of the quaffle. So I thought this was a pretty strong like performance from Rochester across the board on offense. I do think they have to figure out as the season progresses, what their best lineups are. I think that's a question that I want to see answered, and teams across sports, narrow their bench a little bit as the games take on higher stakes. So that's what I'd like to see from Rochester. But I thought one bludger, two bludgers. I thought Rochester handled themselves well.
Yeah, but you kind of mentioned like cutting down your depth chart, but I feel like that's a lot of what's defined Rochester for the last two seasons. And it's why they've gotten to the point that they've gotten to, is because they haven't really done much of that. And that allows, your players. That said, I do agree that I think there was at times a small group of players who seemed confident enough with the ball in their hands up top that when a couple of them weren't on the field, and that was mainly, Ashkar, Girosa, Kiefer, Gominiak. And when a couple of them weren't on the field, that's when things kind of got a little bit more disorganized and they started to have a few more issues. Nothing, though, compared to, the issues I feel like Toronto was running into offensively. Nick, do you want to kind of get into what kind of was ailing Toronto in the half court?
We're in week 3, and tap beats, no matter how much we push them, still are not making it into these teams' vocabulary. This high press falls apart when the beaters continue to engage with those top quaffle players. We saw that Rochester's beaters were allowed to spread out to press these quaffle players with the ball in their hands as much as they wanted. You can go back and watch the film. I'll be doing a breakdown on it later this week. The fact is that Rochester was able to come out and bring their beaters out and basically play point defense without any contests from the other team's beaters. And until a team changes that, like, Rochester's going to be able to press this all they want. And I think that the one bright spot in this situation was Coach Michael Howard continuing to find those flat passes across the lane. Custer's being an excellent off-ball finishing option for this team throughout. And I think that as long as teams refuse to tap beat these point defenders and force these beaters to play a little bit more conservatively, we're going to see these quick turnovers up top.
Yeah, I do think that, the way it kind of felt like it broke down, I mean, these Canada beaters, are some of the best beaters from Canada. They kind of constantly are running things up there. They kind of ran things in that Cleveland series. And I felt like they got a little confounded in game 1, almost a lot of the time by Rochester just like refusing to take an engage, whether to throw back from that really high pressing attack. And you could see it. I really noticed it specifically on Derek Taylor's face, who had such a great series against Cleveland. And he was visibly frustrated from game 1 forward by this Rochester beating core. The other thing, is, Nick, you don't agree?
I think that there's definitely fairness to that. But even if you do that, you can't walk away from that. The fact is that for the first game, Rochester was allowed to sort of, the reason it was so close was that Rochester was forced to throw back from those high press positions. And by game 2, game 3, they were still allowed to press, and Toronto seemed to just go away from that entirely. The fact is that these top quaffle players weren't allowed to be patient with the ball because the Toronto beaters said, oh, we can't get control out of this first attempt because they're just going to throw back. And then they just sort of went away from that and said, well, if they're going to throw back, we might as well not take the engage at all and not let them press their quaffle players.
Yeah, they never even tried to mix up, put a beater behind the high press so that if they try to throw back, they're throwing right back into your other beater. You're right. There weren't really differing attacks. That said, a lot of the ball carriers are people they probably didn't expect to be doing as much ball carrying as they did. Injuries did pile up for this Toronto team. And I think most notably, there were a few. I mean, Melchior has been a very good player for this team for a while, but I think most notably was Andrew Custers, who kind of went in and out of games 2 and 3. It was some kind of a knee injury, but he was able to keep playing, which was really good to see. But this series was really a series that a lot of times was coming down to 50-50 balls and who was making the plays on 50-50 balls and getting more possessions out of that. And Custers was such high energy and was pushing so hard for this team. Defensive stops, going flying through the air on offense to be that passing option for Michael Howard's passing. And when he went out, Toronto just didn't have that same energy. So yeah, I mean, definitely, it'll be interesting to see. This Toronto team still down some beaters. They've yet to see the season, some like Team Canada beaters. They also, lost some to injury. Devin Dutt was supposed to be with the team this week, but was sick. So, we'll see how things come together. It's going to be a long season for Toronto. They get extra games because of the Scavenger Showdown where they get to play Ottawa for a few games. So I think this will be a very different looking team when come championships, if they were to qualify, than it is now. But Nick, you wanted to talk a little bit more about that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is a point of we saw that constantly all the way up and down Rochester's roster, everyone was willing to fight for those 50-50 balls. We saw their beaters being active, sometimes a little too overactive for, quote, wanting that ball and getting unnecessary cards off of it. But if you can take that energy and that's what you're getting out of Series 1 and continue to refine it and make that push of taking that energy and converting it into positive output for this team, that's going to pay dividends. I quoted it on the this weekend, right? On Game 1, Boardman gets paid, a great Kawhi Leonard quote. And this Rochester team embodies that. Offensive rebounds all over the field, beaters constantly fighting for loose balls, making the push to continue to give this team extra possessions and extra opportunities, where a young core is not necessarily going to convert on the first opportunity, but if you continue to push and you get that second and third opportunity, you're going to continue to get goals.
Yeah, no, for sure about Rochester. I just wanted to add, I'm excited to see this Toronto team get healthy because I think they bring something different to the North Division than a lot of other teams, especially that the USQ cores are used to seeing in the Midwest and Great Lakes. Namely, they bring a ton of speed. So a player like Michael Wanless, who also went down, they were just flying around, really difficult to track and keep up with. And I think that's going to pose problems for a team like Indy, which maybe doesn't have as much physicality as Rochester. And also even Minneapolis, which has been kind of the fast team in the Midwest for a while, but has lost some of those speedy players in the chaser game. So I'm excited to see what this Toronto team can do in South Bend.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
So I will say that Toronto, we asked questions in the North, right? This who's going to be the seekers that step up this year across the board, right? Rochester has some of the few reliable seekers that we've seen in the North, in Gominiak and Palpor. But Corey Smithson is a potential reliable seeker coming out of Toronto. I mean, 2 grabs on the weekend. First one got Toronto back in the game. Second one sort of sparked that run we saw in Game 2. And in a region that's sort of devoid of consistent seeking options across the board and has questions across a lot of teams, if Smithson can continue to be that for Toronto, that'll pay big dividends come championship.
Yeah, and props to Smithson doing that while also chasing and also beating in this series for Toronto, doing a little bit of everything, fitting it everywhere. And yeah, I really like the point you're making, because I think one of the things we talked to Cody Narvison about last week is the fact that, Minneapolis, I wouldn't say they got blindsided by Boston at championships, but they just hadn't faced a beating core even slightly like what they ended up having to face against Boston, or a fast break, anything like what they had to face against Boston. And I think re-entering teams like Toronto and Rochester into this North Division makes for a way more dynamic division that's going to give all these teams way better looks heading into championship and getting prepped for championship. I think North Division championship is going to be super fun that way. Just to see how it kind of breaks down at this point. Rochester now needs to take one game off Cleveland to clinch a spot in the North Division Championship game and also clinch a spot in MLQ Championships. They are going to face, either Minneapolis or most likely Indianapolis, just because Detroit has lost the 3-0 already. So one of those two teams. Toronto will now have to wait to see the results of that Cleveland series, but they're most likely slotted to be a second place team on their side, which means they'll play the second place team on the other side for the third seed. If they lose, they'll have to play another game to try to be the fourth seed. So a lot of interesting things to come in the North Division Championship. We won't get too far ahead of ourselves. We got one more interview tonight. So we'll bring on head coach of the Rochester Whiteout, Osa Girosa. Osa, thank you so much for taking the time and for waiting us out for an hour.
Not a problem. Happy to be here.
If it makes you feel better, it's just annoying Harry for us to go long. So it's really a win for everybody.
Truly.
So congratulations on the win. And, we kind of led talking about the defense you guys kind of pulled out. So where did that kind of conceptualize? And, how long have you guys been working on kind of implementing that for the series?
So we've been trying to work on our 2-2 zone, which has been a lot of fun. I would say Solly definitely helped set that up and pushed for us to work on that a lot. And I know our beaters were very excited to get to press high. So we kind of, our strategy was throw it, quaffle, go pressure. It's fun for them, it's fun for us, and we really wanted to capitalize on those turnovers. So that's kind of where our thought was there. Also, we knew that the Toronto team is super athletic, and that a mark defense might not be as advantageous for us as a zone would be. So, yeah.
Well, another thing we were talking about, was kind of the evolution of Kip Halpor as a player. You've now coached him for a season and change with MLQ, also played with him in USQ. Kind of talk about his development and kind of within your program and what you've seen him grow over the last year and change.
So Kit has grown so much. When Kit first joined the team, Kit wanted to just be a seeker. And then at practice, we saw him chase and we're like, absolutely not, you're chasing. So he's really come far. He's very confident. I think anytime we get him the ball near the hoops, I am confident he's going to get a score in there. And he works really well with Bassam. We saw it during Bosnia. We thought very logical solution here for our lines to put them together.
Hi, Osa. Thanks for joining us. My question is about your chaser-beater coordination. I'm just wondering what you guys do to prepare to get your beaters and chasers on the same page on offense specifically.
We spend a lot of our practice time making sure we're communicating. I think Solly and I spend a lot of time yelling at our team, make sure you're communicating, making sure we're patient, waiting for our beaters. Our beaters are great at working together. We've been trying to figure out our beater pairs. Pat Callinan's been super helpful at getting our beaters where they need to be. And I tell Emily all the time, if I could clone Emily, I would, and I'd put her with every single one of our beaters because she's been phenomenal. But it's really just a lot of practicing our offense together and just setting up where our chasers need to be, getting our passes in there, having our beaters help us create those opportunities.
Yeah. Hey, Alyssa.
Hey.
Your veteran core all play on a team in the USQ season that famously doesn't practice. How is it that this? No, it's a genuine question. Like, you seem like they all are they have these great ideas and continue to push them. How does that change from a team that strangely doesn't practice to a team that is so focused and so composed, as Jack wanted to point it out?
Great question. Honestly, the folks in Rochester who participate in our USQ team, being Bosnia, they actually really love practicing. So it's really easy to get them to come. They want to help each other. They want to share their knowledge. And we also have a lot of folks from Skyline on our team too, who have brought a whole wealth of knowledge too, and they don't necessarily always get to participate in their team's practices. So I think everyone takes the energy of the full USQ season of not really getting to practice much, and they're like, let's practice as much as possible this summer together.
That's great to hear.
Alyssa, we were talking about you guys playing all the way down your depth, and someone even mentioning, this team probably could play someone like Bassam a lot more if they wanted to, and probably would be effective. There's no way Bassam would get tired from playing more than the minutes he's currently playing, but it seems like something structured and something intentional from your coaching staff. It's something we also kind of saw from New York early in the season. So talk to us about that, kind of the philosophy you guys have been working in this kind of 2-year and change rebuild you've kind of been on with this program.
Sure. So last year, I think as most people know, we had a very young team, a very new team to MLQ. And Saul and I really wanted to focus on developing everyone. And I think that it's really showing this year that we can trust our team top to bottom to do what they have to do. They're excited. They work really well together. And I think it's really going to help us in the long run, especially when we get to like championships, when we have long days of playing games, that we can hit our full depth and really keep everyone fresh.
Yeah, one of the defining features of your offense the past 2 years for me, along with kind of the equal opportunity aspect, which has just been so fun to watch, is also the kind of intricate movement and people positioning themselves in different places and switching around. Lots of just ball circulation. Can you talk to me about like the benefits of that from like a team building perspective as well? Just making sure that everybody's comfortable in lots of different places.
So we spent a lot of time, especially this year, trying to develop lines of people who are fairly comfortable already playing with each other and can fill different roles. And we've put a lot of control into those lines themselves, giving their thoughts on how they should be setting up their offenses and then teaching each other, because we have such a larger, I guess, background of teams than we've historically had. So everyone's kind of bringing together different pieces, which has been really exciting to see. And it's been great because people want to learn, but we're also trying to find where people fit best on their lines and learning where their strengths are and not necessarily forcing them into a specific role.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, obviously you have a couple weeks coming up, your remaining regular season series, and then North Championships after that. What kind of are you guys looking at in terms of goals, both for the North Division and for the whole season?
Well, we're looking to win the North Division, most definitely. I think that we are well prepared for our Cleveland series, and I know the team's very excited right now, riding off of our series win. So I think that we're going to go in strong to North Division champs, and then I would love to see us, win championships if we can, see how we're doing health-wise, but it should be exciting. I think our team is really excited and has the willpower to do it.
Yeah. I just have one last question. I meant to ask it before that one, and it completely slipped my mind. Rochester, since, as long as me and you have both been around a very long time at this point, has managed to have this reputation of being physical. And being physical, even when they're not the biggest humans. You think of someone like Devin Sandin, and he was a poster child for that, and he was never large. And clearly, you guys have managed to keep that through to this day. And again, a lot of your players aren't the biggest people by any means. So how do you keep that as just like a hallmark of what Rochester is as a program, and keep using it so effectively all the way into 2022?
So we spend a lot of time trying to teach players how to properly tackle and how to be effective with it, because not every single tackling form is going to work for every person. And I think that's kind of evident if you kind of watch the different people on our team. They have different styles about it. But I think it's letting people know that they can do that. They don't need to step out of the way because they're small. There's a way that they can use momentum. And I think, again, Devin was a good person to point at for that, where Devin's not the largest person, but very good at using people's momentum against them. And I think we're seeing that on our team as well. And I think the team's kind of proud to be a hard-hitting team. So I think that helps, where they want to keep up that tradition.
Awesome. Well, Osa, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a joy to be out in Rochester. It's always great being around the Rochester program, where everybody wants to help you out and just is there to make your life easier. It is very nice to be out in Rochester. We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks, and also our North Division Championships. Good luck for the rest of the season.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for watching MLQ Replay this week. If you want even more content, I really recommend you check out our Patreon. We've got awesome content there. We've got player vlogs, Cuts with Cupid. Episode 1 has been out for about a week now. It's wonderful. There's more episodes left to come. Nick, as he mentioned, is planning on doing another a breakdown video strategic this week, and set a pick with Ryan Naraki and Jessica Markle. It's extremely, extremely entertaining. So I highly recommend checking that out as well. All that money goes right into making our digital media product better. As you've seen, I think we're getting more and more high quality streams all around the league, and definitely makes for a more enjoyable watching experience. So we appreciate the contributions. Jack, Regs, Nick, thanks so much for joining me today. Thanks to all of our interviews. They were all great. We'll see you next week. 2 huge series at night. 1 o'clock, we start this day with Detroit against Indianapolis, and then 7 p.m. Eastern is Boston, Washington. 9 p.m. Eastern, series of the week, Austin, San Antonio, likely the battle for the South Division title. We'll see you soon. Have a good week.